The not-so-basic basics of Magic the Gathering explained. This is the setup of a typical game between two players. Each player has the battlefield, where the currently active cards are, a library, where cards not yet used sit until they are ready to be drawn by the players, a graveyard, where the players' used and discarded cards sit, and lands. These three papers note how much life each player and Planeswalker in the game has. They're not technically part of the game board, but they're nice, so you don't have to mentally keep track. These are the parts of a standard card. The name, not particularly important. The mana cost, or how much it costs to play the card. The artwork. Again, not very important. Some cards have very rare artwork that people get excited about. The type of card. This tells, in a very broad manner, how the card can be used. The info box tells, much more specifically, how the card can be used. Each card has a color. I have red, green, and black. Blue and white cards also exist. The color of a card determines either what color mana that card produces or what color it spends. The most basic and common type of card is a creature card. They usually do the most to advance the game towards its end. When a creature is played, it remains in the battlefield until either killed or sacrificed as part of an ability. For this reason, they are known as permanents. Each creature has a power and a toughness. The creature's power is how much damage it does in combat, and its toughness is how much damage it can take before being put in the graveyard. These numbers can change as the game progresses. The next type of cards is three very similar kinds of cards: Enchantments, Instants, and Sorceries. These three types of cards have wildly varying abilities. They can do anything from damaging creatures, to hitting a player directly, to allowing a player to draw cards, and many, many more than are practical to list. Enchantments and sorceries can only be played on your own turn, while instants can be played on your turn or your opponent's turn. Sorceries and instants are resolved immediately. Their effects are one time. After being resolved, they're put in the graveyard. Enchantments act a lot like a permanent in that they stay on the board until disposed of. They are very hard to get rid of. Land cards are used solely as a payment method and have far less variability than other types of card. They each have a color and each produce 1 mana when activated. This mana is used to pay for all other cards. They require no mana to play, but only one of them may be played per turn. Artifacts are played just like creatures and are also permanents. Where they differ, however, is that they cannot attack on their own. Usually, they need to be equipped to a creature. This is designated by placing it under. They make the creatures more powerful or give them special abilities. Planeswalkers are the newest addition to Magic. They act very much like another player, but they are controlled by one of the players. They have very strong abilities, and rather than a power and toughness number like creatures, they have life points, like a player. Their abilities revolve around how much life they have, and spending some of their life to activate their abilities. To start each game, both players have their library and a hand of 7 cards. The hand is hidden from your opponent. For the first turn, the first player uses the resources available to him to play. In almost all cases, this is simply playing a land card that can be used for mana in the coming game. After there are enough lands and cards out on the board, turns turn into multi-stage processes. In the first stage of a turn, the players draw a card from the library, resolve any card abilities that happened on each turn, and untap all of their own cards. Tapping is when a card is turned sideways as part of using its abilities. Tapped cards aren't able to be used until they untap at the beginning of a turn. The second stage is for playing lands, creatures, sorceries, instants, enchantments, planeswalkers, and artifacts. This is the most common time for playing these things. This third stage is for attacking and defending. The active player declares which cards are attacking by sliding them into the battlefield. All attacking cards are tapped unless their info box says otherwise. The inactive player can choose which cards of his own to use to defend from each attacking card. Using a card for defense does not require that card to tap. If, during this stage, a creature engages with a card that has a power lower than its own toughness, that creature loses that much toughness until the end of the turn, at which point it is healed to full. If a creature's toughness goes below 0, it is put in the graveyard. The fourth stage is another time to play lands, enchantments, instants, creatures. The fourth stage is another time to play lands, enchantments, instants, creatures, etc. This is a time that is far less used, but can be a very strategic time. This is a very popular time to play instants and enchantments. Okay. Minimum size for a deck is 60 cards, except for in some tournament formats, which only require 40 because of the limited availability of cards. When you're building a deck, you should probably stick to 1 or 2 colors. Land takes up about a third of the deck. 6 or 7 out of every 20 of your cards should be land. This isn't so much a rule of deck building as it is the language of the game, but when naming a mixed deck, the prominent color is said first and then the supporting color, such as green-red or red-green, depending on whether green is the prominent color or red is the prominent color in the deck. A huge part of the strategy of Magic the Gathering is what type of deck you use. There are 4 main types of deck. Aggro, or aggressive decks, attempt to get tons of cheap, low toughness, high power cards onto the board, and drain your opponent's life before they ever have a chance to set anything up. Of the 5 colors, red, black, and red-black are the most commonly used for this strategy, with the rare red-green. Aggro, or aggressive decks, attempt to get tons of cheap, low-toughness, high-power cards onto the board and drain your opponent's life before they ever have a chance to set up. Of the 5 colors, red, black, and red and black are the most commonly used for this strategy, with the rare red and green. Control decks attempt to stop all of your opponent's plans and to drag out the game, slowly giving you the upper hand. Usually involves a lot of instants. This is the most difficult deck type to use, but it can be the most rewarding. Blue and white are the most used for this type of deck. Black, or blue and black, can be used, but are less respected as a serious strategy and are seen more as a deck for trolls and people who are just messing around. Combo decks are focused around building 1 to 3 massive, powerful creatures to take an opponent down in one turn. They require some planning, but not nearly as much as a control deck. They are typically green or green and red. Mid-range decks attempt to get the best of the other decks, but to use one requires reduced reliability and far more compromising to make it work. This is the only type of deck where a tritone deck mixture is playable. The most common combinations for its usage are white-green, white-green-black, and green-black. A final kind of deck that isn't really a type on its own, but also doesn't fit any of the others very well, is Suicide Black. It is a only black deck that attempts to use all resources at its disposal, including mana, the other player, and the player's own life, to kill the other player as fast as it can. It is kind of a mix between aggro decks and combo decks. This has been the not-so-basic basics of Magic the Gathering Explained.